This is episode 4 of our speaker series, Reclaiming Climate Justice, which is a series all about hearing from incredible organizers across Europe who are working with their communities and fighting for climate justice and liberation in all the different capacities that they have. And so today you're going to hear from 3 incredible organizers. We have one person, Rose, joining from the International Women's Space based in Berlin. And we have 2 speakers from the Azadi Collective or Assembly that are joining us from Turkey. So I will pass it to Rose first and ask you to say a bit about yourselves, introduce yourself, share with us how you're doing today, Rose, and how you're coming to this space.
Yeah, so my name is Rose Wanjiku. I'm from Kenya, and currently I'm organizing with the International Women's Space based here in Berlin. And my great interest is in climate justice because I come from the global south, which is one of the most affected regions by climate change and affected, and I mean, little is being done to handle issues that are affecting the people of the global south. So I'm coming to this conversation expecting that this conversation will generate more interest to at least provide justice and a voice to the people of the global south. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rose. Would you like to say a little bit about International Women's Space?
Yeah, so the International Women's Space is an organization based in Berlin. As I have said, it is by migrant and refugee women. It's a feminist organization, and its foundation is from a refugee protest that was held in 2012 here in Berlin to protest against a lot of laws and things that were happening to refugees in Berlin and in Germany in general. For example, restrictions of movement and also giving people vouchers for food instead of allowing them free will to choose what they want to eat or where they want to shop or where they want to move. So, I mean, this was in itself very restrictive, and a lot of people came together to protest this. And I mean, for years they protested, and then there was a change in the laws that kept refugees restricted into various lagers. I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with the system, the way it works here, that people are put in specific places, and during that time, that is around 2012, people are not allowed to leave the districts in which the government had registered them. So that became very restrictive, and people were confined, and it felt like prisons, because I mean, most of these centers are either former army barracks, or I mean, they have the reputation of having been used. Also, if you know the history of Germany, you can guess some of these reception centers were not mainly supposed to be lived in. And when people were restricted in those centers, then it made their reason for arriving here or for being here in Germany a little bit confounding for them. So yeah, and it's by refugee women and also for friends of refugee and migrant women. So it's a diverse representation of issues of refugee and migrant women. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We're going to get into that more in just a moment, but let's also introduce our other 2 speakers, Pelin and Leyla, to you. Whomever, Leyla, hello. Would you like to introduce yourself and say a bit about how you're doing, how you're coming to this conversation?
Hello. This is Leyla. My last name is Keskin. I'm from Turkey. I was born in southeast of the country in the Kurdish area in Batman, and I live in Mardin city at the moment. I am a teacher, visual arts teacher. I am teaching secondary school students at the moment. I am a researcher and an artist at the same time. I'm interested in ecology, specifically in my geographic area. I'm interested in ecological destruction, and I look into a concept called ecological mourning. I did my master's degree on this. I analyzed the Hassan Cave Dam, water dam, and I checked the documentary films in that area. And I analyzed the emotional changes experienced by the people. I looked at the different species that face the risk of extinction, and all this work is recorded. And I also work with Yazidi women in refugee camps. I had interviews with them, and I talked to their children, and I conducted artistic activities in the refugee camps. This is basically combining art and therapy for children. These are especially disadvantaged children. These are refugee children, children of war. So I'm working for them. I also work as a drama teacher, visual arts, drama. That's basically what I'm doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Leyla, so much. It sounds like
My
incredible
pleasure.
work. I look forward to hearing more about it. Pelin, how? No, sorry. I was just pacing myself because I know that the French and Spanish, it might be still going. But hello, Pelin. How are you? How are you doing? How are you coming?
Thank
Yeah.
you very much. And I salute everyone here. Thank you very much for inviting us for this panel. Rosie, nice to meet you. And I would like to thank our translators for their labor. We are connected from Batman, Mardin, southeast of Turkey. And I'm teaching here since 11 years. I moved here from Istanbul. And I'm a professor and head of a film department in the University of Batman. And previously, I was working in Mardin Artuklu University. I work in an interdisciplinary art field, mostly in the context of critical spatial practices, like any scale of from rural to urban and territorial practice. And we established a collective independent, which has no institutional connection to anything. We are like around 8 architect, artists, sociologists, and we are working together on researching, conducting research in the field, organizing workshops, also sharing advocacy for communities, rural communities and other urban communities. And this is also for us, especially if I speak for myself, it's a kind of a way to create how we can make research function turn into an action. And many of the issues that we are dealing right now for not for a long time, actually, it's about how extractivism is harming the in climate, and the whole cycle is connected with eviction and migration. There are many layered issues here. It's very intense, but we will hopefully come with a question and answer about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pelin. Yeah, I think we'll hopefully be able to touch on many of that in the next 45 minutes. Just logistically, I saw a hand from a participant, I believe, for a while there. And if Pak, if you are still with us, make sure you ask your question in the Q&A or in the chat so we can hear it. Happy to hear from you there. But yeah, so welcome to our speakers. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and sharing the first bits of your work. So yeah, we've talked about quite a few things on the series so far. It started with kind of setting a baseline of what climate justice is, what we're talking about when we're talking about addressing the root causes of it, which moved into us talking about these kind of colonial mindsets and colonial structures that we still function in and are in many cases trying to resist in order to build a more libertarian future for ourselves. And in the last episode, we talked about spatial justice, which Pelin also touched on kind of there. In terms of, and we tried to understand spatial justice in the sense of the right to the spaciousness of deciding how we want to live, especially in relation to land resources. And so I feel we'll kind of continue on from that conversation in this episode. But first, I'm curious from each of you, if you could share a bit about, or a little bit more about the context from which you're coming from and how you yourself are understanding the climate crisis and what it means to fight for climate justice in the communities you are part of. Whoever would like to go first, I'm happy to hear from you. Pelin, do you want to start us off?
Everyone is trying to be kind.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think there are several layers that is connected with the climate crisis and also the territories. I don't want to separate between saying global south or northern side. You know, I think this is a kind of misleading. I know that of course we can consider that maybe uneven development is more extreme in different geographies, but it's very difficult to say that, to argue that global South is facing more the climate crisis. So this is my stand. And secondly, what I'm concerned, and with our research group, we are looking for large infrastructural projects like solar panel projects, water dam, border politics, border policy in southeast of Turkey, also in the west coast, that the whole side is controlling the flow of refugee-hood since years, not only the Syrian refugee, but also other kind of refugee flow. The extractive infrastructures are directly harming the landscape, the land. And this causes directly lack of water irrigation system. And this is directly affecting the agricultural production. And this affects directly the human life and also other non-humans. So there's a kind of, as we all know, a cycle. And for us, it's so easy and it's so clear here to see the cycle. For example, Leyla can maybe talk about that. We are in the region where I'm just near to Tigris River, my office, my home. And we are facing since years the effect of the water dam, a big dam that was planned for long years by the government, and it has been installed in several parts of the river that controls the flow of the water. It controls the territory, and also it leads a lot of uneven situation, like transforming villages and settlements into different kind of places, which harms the daily life, daily production, and survival economies of communities. And of course, women and children are the most who are affected by that. And ethnic identities becomes top of it. There is always the more vulnerable. Syrian women are collecting waste in Batman in the night. They're collecting paper and separating this waste. And then there are other communities like Yazidi communities who are a bit oppressed by the Sunni Muslim communities, for example, Sunni Muslim Kurds. And then there is government is oppressing everyone. So it's a kind of like a double oppression from all the ethnic communities that who is more vulnerable, and especially who are women and children are more oppressed, and they are more in a fragile condition. The second question about how we can deal with the climate crisis. I mean, climate crisis is about oppression of other ethnic communities, is about not really respecting the non-humans cycle, not respecting other communities who are the indigenous communities who are having a direct relation in a non-hierarchical way with nature, with stone, water, leaf, seed, and this is something like this whole symbiosis has been destroyed by the big infrastructural projects. So this is also a kind of a big thing for me, not only as a material culture, but also intangible heritage that leads to climate crisis, that gives meaning to climate crisis too. I think this is very important. And lastly, I want to give the word maybe to Leyla to continue with ecological mourning, the term. But in how to fight against climate crisis, I think we do, as a research group, we do several things. I mean, first, pedagogy is very important, education. I mean, I'm a professor in a university. People are not aware what climate crisis is. People are not aware that in 10 years, there will be no water in this region. One of my environmental engineer friends told me. And people are fighting for water for electricity bill because you need water to dump, to get the water from the earth here for your corpse field, which consumes a lot of water. And other modified seed production, they consume a lot of water, and you need a lot of water. And to get the water from the earth, you need electricity to take it out. So this whole infrastructure is related with a lot of chain and relation that, for example, in Kızıltepe, where agricultural field, which is a city near Mardin, has approximately 15,000 water source places. And it is working through electricity to get the water. And if you don't pay the bill, you don't have a water. If you don't have the water, your products in the agricultural land burns because of the heat and so on. And each of those water quarters, let's say headquarters, is been, I mean, the Syrian families refugee families are working. They are living there. They are working for the farmers. So there is also a labor issue that goes from climate crisis to migration and to. I think pedagogy. We can come back on that. We can give more details.
Yeah. But you make really good points about the circularity of some of these layered issues and how one thing leads to another, and what we mean when we're talking about looking at the climate crisis holistically and seeking climate justice. There's so many layers to it that need to be understood and held at the same time. So it's an important aspect to bring in. I don't know if it makes sense to hear from Leyla first, or if Rose, you want to say something first about your context.
Rose, maybe you can say something about from Kenya.
Yeah, I know that the circular nature of what you were saying, Pelin, about the effects of these big industry projects on the land and our resources. then affecting agricultural land, and then that affecting people, I think is a similar thing that happens in many parts of the world, right? Yeah, Rose.
Yeah, I think I want just to point out at what Pelin has said about the use of the word the global south. And I do acknowledge that in this context, we need to decolonize the language that we are using, because we realize that the colonization also brought a lot of language use that basically is discriminatory, and it's some sort of racial profiling. For example, we came from talking about developing nations, talking about third world countries. So you see, when it comes to definition, I do understand in this context, it's also the reason why when we are talking about climate justice, then the issue of let me now use this reference as the global majority is not being recognized because, of course, of the language and the context of which the issues that they are facing are being framed. So, I do acknowledge also the fact that you say that research needs to function, right? Yeah, because a lot of research is being done, and it's not functioning, as you may say, because we have been told that the world is warming at this rate and this rate, but people don't seem to be taking cognizance of the fact that actually this is happening, because right now, for example, in Africa, a lot of countries are facing what we call a heat wave. Here in Europe, they are saying the summers are the winters are a bit warm. So you can see that it's already beginning to be, a lot has been written and said about the warming of the globe and the changing of the dynamics. For example, the reason why the Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, is experiencing drought for the last 4 years. So, I do agree that we need to find a way to see how research functions. To get into it, I come from Kenya, and Kenya is a distinctive region that we have 4 things working. And by 4 things, we have sections that do agriculture, we have pastoralism, we have fishing, and we have the normal industries. And of course, because of most of the people it's subsistence farming in Kenya that is mostly who are producing the food for the majority of the population. They do farming, and this farming is dependent on the rain. And these rains are not coming regularly for the last 4 years. So you can already see that for the people depending on the crop to feed themselves, that means that they are unable to feed themselves. For the people depending on the fish, that means definitely there is also the ecology of the fish is being affected, and also, in terms of the water availability. Then we also come to the pastoralists. There are, large communities in Kenya that are keeping animals, and in this case, when it doesn't rain, because their animals are also depending on the rain to rain so that pasture can grow, so that their animals can grow. So you can see the intersectionality of, if rains fail, that means millions of people in Kenya are at risk. And already that risk is something that is already, it's well known, it's a well documented fact that they say in the next 1 year, a lot of, probably 33 million people, maybe in sub-Saharan Africa, will need food. And you can imagine these people are people with land. They would want to till. It's not because they are lazy that they are not being able to feed themselves, but it's because the rain is not coming anymore, that they are not able to grow food. And people who are keeping livestock are not being able to also sustain their way of livelihood. So this is the way the changes, in the And I mean, one of the things that is obvious for a lot of people is that the rains are failing, right? And probably like Pelin points out, many people are not really understanding what is happening to cause that the change in seasons, the lack of the rains and the drought. So that when we talk about climate change and climate justice, is sometimes to people, although they live the reality. For example, I mean, I have witnessed rivers drying up in areas of the country I come from. Rivers have dried up, forests have gone. I mean, you can see a lot of changes, and the reference to ecological mourning. People are mourning the loss of biodiversity, the loss of their forests, the loss of their livelihoods, but I mean, they have not been able to like pin this to the effects of climate change or the climate crisis. And in terms of movement, I mean, there is also like not, it hasn't been accepted that people are actually moving because their livelihoods have changed because of the climate crisis. And also in terms of reference, I would also want to say when we are talking about climate crisis and migration, I think it would be nice if we say the people on the move, because now we do acknowledge that people are moving. And because we all know when we talk about refugee, when we talk about migrants, there's the perception of who a refugee is, who a migrant is. But generally, people are moving within the continent. For example, within Africa, people are moving. People are moving to Europe. We have seen that. We all have witnessed what is happening at the Mediterranean Sea. So, I mean, people are on the move, and they are not moving because they really want to move. And this is something that is beyond control. But I think then this is something we can be able to discuss and see how this can be.
I have a question for you, Rose. I like this term of people on the move. And I was thinking about this question of like the designation or definition of migrants or refugees and how internationally it's not sufficient how people are defining things. Do you feel like this phrase of people on the move is meant to like, can it be a uniter in some sense of different types or different reasons for migration? Do you feel like that term is useful for that?
I mean, yeah, people, when we talk about people on the move, it gives some sort of, I mean, there's no restrictions, there's no like, there's no restriction into movement, and people are making conscious decisions, maybe forced by the change in climate. But when we say people on the move, at least I feel that it gives that human face into it. Because when we talk about refugees, when we talk about migrants, we all can see what is happening in Europe. When we talk about refugees, when we talk about migrants, the perception is that these are people who are coming in to take. These people are coming in to take resources that belong to Europe. But I mean, if we were really to think about this perception of people arriving in Europe to take, when we talk about colonization, when we talk about extractivism, really now, because I mean, a lot of countries in Africa are facing this extractivism. People have been moved out of their homes, for example, for oil to be drilled. We all know what is happening in Uganda, in Mozambique. A part of that is likely to happen in Namibia, where Germany is supposed to construct, a hydrogen power plant. And you see, producing power for Europe and making people in Namibia homeless. I mean, that doesn't make sense. There's also an example of another project in Kenya, a wind power project. It is said to be the biggest power project in Kenya because apparently the area in which it is located has good wind. But do you know what happened when that project was being done? People were moved. They were not given alternative land. I mean, this whole thing of producing green energy is displacing a lot of people. For example, if people are moved from land that they are able to grow food and they are just displaced, how are they supposed now to get a livelihood? If that person, for example, moves around the continent and they are not able to settle and in a way they find themselves here in Europe, I mean, no one tries to understand the basis of why they are moving in the first place from their countries. And it's because of these issues of extractivism and also like, I do think some of these green energy projects are not being well thought out. And they are not also like considering that people are moving because this is taking away their land and their livelihood. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. That is there's so many instances I think we can share about people feeling like they have the right answers for the climate crisis, but that ignores so many of the elements that you all are sharing. I just want to share some numbers about internally displaced persons. At the end of 2022, an estimated 71.1 million people were displaced within the borders of their own countries, 62.5 million as a result of conflict and violence, 8.7 million as a result of disasters. There's lots of people on the move, that need to be understood and heard and cared for. And so I'll pass to Leyla, and maybe you can say a bit about ecological mourning and the work you've been doing around this, and how it relates also to migration and thus self-determination or fights for self-determination.
Tabii önce
I would like to start by referring to what has been said. We talk about climate crisis, and it is very well explained so far. How about the consequences of climate crisis? How about the emotional consequences? How does it impact our emotional welfare? This will bring me to the ecological mourning. People experience losses, and this is causing mourning. And we can talk about what could be done. For that, we could become environmental activists. We could join forces. We could support each other. We could understand each other's emotions. We could spend more time in the nature, and we could be more conscious about nature. And we could spend more time with people who are interested in nature. How shall I say? We could have conversations about ecology, about the losses. Based on my personal research, I tried to understand the consequences of migration that was caused by the flooding in my hometown village. And 80 or 90 villages were evacuated by the government years ago. The government made people evacuate their houses. Some had to move to Europe. Some had to move to urban areas. It was evacuated because there were just no village guards in those villages. Before, in those villages, women were producers, but where they went, they just became consumers. This is all because of migration. And in those years, those people were actually mostly Kurdish people. They spoke Kurdish language. But when they moved to urban areas, they had language problem. They had problem accessing the labor force. Before migrating, they had their own land, but after migrating, they didn't have any land, and this resulted in poverty and violence. Many people couldn't adapt to this situation and became substance addicts. Some of them tried to come back to the village. And because of the new water dam construction, the villagers were evacuated again. Together with Pelin, we go visit the villages one by one. We talk to the people. We ask what happened after the water dam construction, how the construction impacted their life. We're also looking into the likely effect the art can play. We're interested in creating good outcomes through art and artistic activities. And we also try to explore how we can bring people together, how we can be of help to them, and how we can share this destiny. So we look into that in our research. What else can I say? Well, I could also talk about exploitation or abuse of soil. Some people, unfortunately, are not able to irrigate their land. They suffer from the results of climate crisis. And I'd like to introduce a different viewpoint. We should also talk about soil abuse in Kızıltepe, where we are at the moment. In 1 year, you could harvest 3 times. Sometimes there are fire instances that break out in the forest, and this damages the farm, of course. Normally, you harvest the land a year and then you leave it the next year so the soil rests and collects nutrition again, and then you harvest the land again, but that's not happening. What's happening is we harvest 3 times a year. So climate crisis puts us in a minority situation. It's quite different. In the past, flowers would blossom toward April. Now they blossom in February. I see a big problem in here. What can be done about that? We need to think seriously about doing something regarding climate crisis. I could also talk about climate justice. I don't think there is justice between communities, between West and East, South and North. I don't think there is justice. And regarding the climate justice, we can't talk about an equal distribution. What I mean is, environmental justice means social justice. If you see social justice in a place, then you can talk about climate justice. In terms of where I live, let's say there is a water dam construction. That results in division of land. We have a giant irrigation, Southeast Anatolia irrigation project. It covers east and south of Anatolia. Basically, what they do is they build water dams on every river. But according to my research, specifically on Hasan Cave Water Dam or other dams, there were lots of activities conducted. Activists came here and did demonstrations. Since 1954, there has always been a slow violence in Yalusu Water Dam area. In Brazil, there was a Monte waterfall construction on the Amazon River, and the same thing happened. that construction resulted in the migration of indigenous people there. This is not justice. This is so unfair to the indigenous people because they were displaced because of that construction. So for a water dam to last for 50 years, they destroy lives of people who have been there for maybe hundreds of years. This is so sad. It is so sad. It's painful. Actually, this is exactly what ecological mourning is. Well, so far, that's all I wanted to say so far. I am sorry, I was a little bit excited. Maybe I might have mixed certain things up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leyla. No, I think I was thinking of what Rose was just saying about how these things, these solutions are not always so thought through. As you said, a dam for 50 years displaces people who have been there for centuries or many, many generations. And climate justice asks us to constantly look for a more just solution forward, right? To think of all these nuances and layers to ensure we're not being unjust to one group over another or anyone at all. And so I definitely think that was relevant. So thank you for sharing. I'm conscious of time. There's so
Bir
much
şey daha
there.
eklemek istiyorum.
Can I say something? We
Sure.
talk about migration, about climate crisis. How about animal migration? Animals migrate too. Animals are also displaced, even plants. They migrate, they're displaced. I think that should also be a part of this conversation. Many animals go through mutations. Or think of different fish species impacted by the construction of water dams. Think of a river, the water flows, but after a while, the fish lack sufficient amount of oxygen because the water is not flowing anymore, because the water becomes still. This results in changes, mutations. So this migration is also about animals, plants, and humans.
I very much agree. I think sometimes we talk about climate justice and we do focus a lot on people that are affected. Most affected people and areas, though, is the term, right? So at least from a more decolonized perspective on the climate crisis, I often hear people speak of it in tandem. But too often in major mainstream conversations, I agree, like we are centering the human much more than we probably should be. I'm conscious of time, and so I also want to bring us into thinking about self-determination as it relates to Europe's response to these kind of situations. I mean, we can talk for a very long time about like the actual environmental impacts of such decisions and impacts on movement of people in the places that you all come from. And so for everyone listening, I encourage you to reach out and learn more. First of all, do your own research, learn about these places, understand what the situations are, and reach out to these speakers and make stronger connections if you're interested. But in some of our previous conversations, we were talking about what becomes of migrants when they relocate to new places, especially when they relocate to Fortress Europe, and the conversation around Europe maintaining its borders and denying the self-determination of migrants in many cases. And so as we move into talking about how we're organizing in response to that, I just wanted to bring this up. And because earlier I read some other statistics on migrations, and one that stood out to me was that in 2023, remittances, so like money that's being sent back from people who have migrated to places like within Europe or Western Europe, Remittances to low and middle income countries are estimated to have increased by 4% from 2022 and reached 669 billion. And these flows of remittances exceed foreign direct investment to these same places by more than 250 billion in 2023. And when I read that, I thought about how the conversation in Europe about a migrant crisis always places, as Rose was saying, this narrative of people coming to take from Europe. But when I read that, I remind myself about how these people that are on the move are coming to places, paying taxes in these new places that they're supposed to call home, and at the same time sending more money back to their families and loved ones than the global community does through our traditional agreed on avenues. And I just find that so important to think about and to challenge the narrative when thinking of that. We are out here building our communities, supporting one another, doing what we can to survive while we fight these big systems that are actually not caring for us in that way. And so I just share that to lead us into talking about like Europe's response and therefore how we are responding when we fight for climate justice in our communities. Would anyone like to say a bit about that, about how we consider all of this and how we move forward and be in solidarity with one another, what that means to you all? Rose, I would pass it back to you first if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you point out to this issue of remittances and looking at it from an economic perspective, but this perhaps could be misinterpreted by the people who are trying to build a fortress around Europe to look at the resources that probably the people are sending back home and forgetting to look at how much, for example, maybe their countries are investing back in Africa, for example. For me, the conversations about these numbers should be looked vis-a-vis also larger factors. For example, I don't know of any country in Africa that is not in debt. Like one of the fights, one of the things that we are doing as International Women's Space and other collectives is to look at the debt aspect in Africa. A lot of countries are burdened actually. And we see that the IMF, the World Bank, they keep coming to countries, giving them conditions about the money they can receive. I mean, countries are largely overburdened. So even if you look at this money being sent back home, it's really nothing compared to the resources that have been taken from these countries and brought, for example, into Europe. We cannot discuss the issue of DRC Congo right now and its resources and the resources that the ones that are sustaining the telephone companies here, the motor industries here. So when we talk about the economic aspect and thinking that actually this money that is apparently being sent back by the people who are here in Europe, I mean, it cannot compare with the sort of resources that are being taken away from the continent. I mean, there cannot be any comparison. So when it comes to organizing around these issues, I mean, this is what we are trying to do. Like these numbers are good, but we are also trying to see at the human cost, for example, of this extractivism. We are also trying to see at the cost of human life, for example, when you look at people dying and crossing the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, you cannot start saying that the people who are arriving here, it can be justified because now they are being able to send money. So one of the things we are doing is trying to make these stories real and trying to see how we can, I mean, this extractivism has, the narrative has to change. The issue of, for example, Europe now trying to do build borders around, and they have passed a law, by the way. The European Parliament now is, I mean, they have discussed all these laws that are supposed to keep people away. We see what the UK is doing. It's supposed to be sending people back to Rwanda. I mean, you can all see this, the fear that they are putting and the narrative that governments around Europe are putting about migrants. And I'm so sorry to say that these policies, these laws seem to be profiling of Black bodies. Because I mean, when you look at what is being done, mostly it's just to prevent people from Africa from crossing over to Europe. There was a deal by the EU with Morocco. I think, I don't know how far that deal is. They were supposed to give money to Morocco so that Morocco can also put up borders so that people trying to move into Europe cannot move. So you can see that, I mean, a lot of, I mean, this migration is also being looked at, I mean, from the racial aspect, like, I mean, criminalizing and profiling Black bodies. And I think this is one of the things that we are trying to do while we are working with people across Europe, with other collectives, so that we can bring this conversation. We still have to address the issue of racism. I mean, racial profiling is something that is still very prominent. And when we talk about climate crisis, then it's gonna be worse, because we are still looking at people running away from poverty, but we are not even looking at the first reason why there is this poverty. We are looking at destruction of their land. We are looking at their, I mean, destruction of their livelihood. We are looking at a lot of things. But when we look at poverty, when we look at war, when we look at peace, we are not even talking about the war on resources. Pelin and have reference to this. There's war that is happening that no one is talking about. Communities fighting about resources. For example, if those people who have pastoralists, I mean, these wars have been there. For example, in parts of Kenya, you go to Senegal, you go to everywhere, you find farmers and pastoralists are always fighting. And this war no one is talking about. This war on resources, we are not talking about it. So I think when we talk about solidarity, we need to be in touch with the communities and that are affected. And I mean, we are not saying that we offer solutions, because I disagree to, I mean, the approach that there are people somewhere seated and have all the solutions. I believe in harnessing local knowledge, which I think is what the two are doing very well. And I mean, I'm impressed by what they are doing at a community level, because it's only when communities understand their power, they can also be able to mobilize. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rose. Yeah, this last bit is really where I see myself focusing these days as well. And exactly as you said, what I was saying was this, we need better framing. We need better framing always consistently to fight a mainstream framing of who migrants and refugees are, what has caused their need to move in the first place. That framing is super important and comes from folks like you who are doing this very important work. And so with that, I'll pass to Pelin, because you spoke a lot about education and pedagogy, about how you, and I relate that to framing, how we are educating one another, sharing information in a way that helps us truly understand these kind of underlying and layered issues. If you'd like to say just a little bit about that.
I think we don't have so much time, isn't it, Sami?
Okay, I think I
Yeah,
love
a little bit
more
yes.
from you, and then we'll close out.
Yeah. There are several things, strategies we do as an educator, artist, and an activist. Of course, we're engaged with the local communities. I mean, we are local ourselves too. But just I want to say something about a little bit referring to previous talks, that generally we are learning about climate nowadays from the shepherds. They know what is the exact change. And because of that, we did a workshop with student artists who are mostly working on ecology and designers in Batman last year, with the shepherds, collaborating with the shepherds, like walking with them, spending time with them, learning from them, and engaging to understand about the potentialities about the grazing land, the lands that are not doesn't have any private ownership, and they are common lands that are cultivated collectively, common by the local people. This is very important because the government, as it is everywhere, wants to grab those lands in order to transform into property, because they are middle, they are not property, like either private property, or governmental property. But then it leads to, again, establishing housing projects, water dam, petrol station headquarters, petrol drilling stations, and other kinds of solar panel companies wants to come, and so on. So landscape is very much used for, or land, as also both Rosie and Leyla was mentioning, that the ownership, the collective ownership, the private ownership, the governmental ownership, and grabbing land is really one of the bases that affects the whole. It boosts, starts all the extraction and uneven development. So we did a workshop with the student. That we collaborate with the shepherds, so neither directly with the pastoralist nomads. There are several types of nomads here, and they are nomading with their animals, and of course this whole intervention of infrastructure is preventing their roots of nomadism. And this is also, of course, cutting the relation with because there is a kind of a relation, symbiosis relation with the nature, that we learn from the nature. We learn how to heal. We learn how to eat for free, and produce for free, heal ourselves, everything. I mean, there's a lot of potentialities from the nature, and they know it very well, this knowledge. So this is one thing. And second thing, maybe Sami wanted me to press the different kind of variation of thinking about de-archiving. I mean, how archive is becoming very important practice methodology, which we are, as a medium, either digital archiving or different kind of methods, how we can do different kind of archiving, seed archiving, female labor production archiving, food fermentation practice archiving, the spatial-site, the ecosite archiving. I mean, when the spatial-site happens, when the ecosites happen, the space, the memory totally disappears, which is a big ecological mourning that we are facing, that Leyla was mentioning. And when this happened, the erase of this whole heritage, intangible heritage, whatever, then we don't, I mean, this memory of the space and the whole network of humans and non-humans totally disappears. And archiving is a kind of a method that brings back this whole, a kind of a contra methodology against colonialism and extractivism, that creates also solidarity with different archives, with different communities. Just I'm finishing. We are working with different kind of groups. We are working with Palestinian architects and artists, decolonizing architecture, for example, DAR. And we're also working with Nishat Awan and Zahra Hussein, two architects from Pakistan, who are also working on climate crisis and justice in Pakistan. And we did several workshops together in Palestine, in Turkey, and it's very important to be not do collective research and being in solidarity with people, with the inhabitants, but it's also important for sharing the solidarity that what happens in different. We had, I don't want to say only global south again, we had also people from Bolzano, Boden last year, who are facing the tunnel of the Alp that is creating for tourism, that is creating a big harm on the mountain and grazing land, that the local people are losing their sources, natural sources, and ways of doing, ways of making cheese, ways of making yogurt, ways of making, this fundamental food and clean food and clean crop, clean wheat, clean soil, and this all are connected to that. And I think one, of course, activism is to create such archives and solidarity, and present and make the link together, I think.
Thank you so much, Pelin. You've shared a couple points about solidarity, as did Rose, being in touch with community, beyond solidarity, beyond like raising voices and sharing people's perspective, which we've seen a lot of, especially with Palestine in the last 4 or 5 months as it's been. But beyond that, what does solidarity look like? And Rose was talking about actually being in touch with communities who are feeling these effects directly. You're speaking about archiving, documenting, ensuring that histories are recognized as they are. Is there any last words anyone would like to say about solidarity across borders before we close out? I know this is short, there's so much more we can say, but anything else you'd like to, or last words on this before we close? Or last any words from?
I think it's important, we couldn't dwell in so much, but the term slow violence, it's very important. That is mostly mentioned by my colleague Saad Amira from Ramallah, who did a PhD on a village in Palestine that was under ecocide and spacocide and slow violence of removing the colonial settlers were removing their olive trees and trying to kill slowly the agriculture and so on. I think it is very important to be aware of there are similar things are going on, and all is a planetary effect on climate and on our life also. When we talk about climate crisis and justice, we should really not be aware that we don't focus so much on human-centered. I mean, climate justice is not about only, maybe it shouldn't be misunderstood in our talk, is not about only reaching clean food or self having good quality stuff and so on, that human needs, this should be not only the worries about that, but we know that war and militarism is totally causing the planetary effect of war and consumption of many extractive things. So I think it's important to also teach ourselves through solidarity to understand or wording or action or methodologies and strategies, I think.
Thank you so much, Pelin, also for bringing in that last part. Leyla, any last word on solidarity or anything else you'd like to share?
Dayanışmayla ilgili şey söylemek istiyorum. Hani göç
About solidarity. I have been working with migrants in training sessions, and I have Syrian migrant students in my school, and there is a racial aspect to this. Unfortunately, these people are racially excluded. Before they were on the move, they were producers, whereas here now they're just consumers. Even the fact that I refer to them as them, it's not fair. They are in our lives, in this community. To stop the climate crisis, we should concentrate on education, early childhood education, maybe Children should know why it's important to plant trees. What is the tree? Does it have an identity? Even early years in life, we should do our best to teach the children the importance of our environment. We should maybe not so much concentrate on adults, but when it comes to education, we should concentrate on the young children. The life cycles of a living thing, whether it's a human or a plant or an animal. We can teach them. They could make friends with a plant or an animal. They're all living things. We should teach them. That's the basics. I think that makes sense. I'd like to give you an example regarding migration. Yazidi people to migrate to Turkey during ISIS time. I am a member of a teachers' trade union, and within that framework, I worked as a volunteer to teach art for the migrant children. And we did this in many cities, Diyarbakir, Batman, Mardin, and elsewhere. Volunteers worked for children, teaching them art. And in Diyarbakir camp, refugee camp, we worked with women, and we wanted to create an ecological space. And it was like a therapy. People could plant their tomatoes, vegetables. It was like a therapy because those people fled war. We should give them more such spaces. That's good for solidarity. That's good for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Leyla. And Rose, last word from you. Anything else you'd like to add to the conversation or say about solidarity?
Yeah, I think for me, being here in Europe and looking at the issue of climate justice and migration, I think for me, solidarity is multidimensional. By that, I mean, there is the politics of it, because we do agree that, there's a lot of politics happening, and we know about the UN panel on climate justice. Our voices need to be there because that's where the decisions are made. And I mean, a lot of things that are happening or not happening, it's because decisions have been made there, sometimes without the voice of the people. So I think as we need to be there in those politics, because it's what is driving the world. And we also need to be on the ground, on the grassroots. And also to say that when we talk about climate change, it doesn't know borders. So, when we talk about solidarity, it's not because maybe, for example, I would want people to show up with placards to say that things are bad. For example, in Kenya, no. The same things are affecting people in Europe. So when we talk about solidarity, people should also think that this is affecting them in a way or another. Maybe they are not being keen to look at it, but when we talk about solidarity, it's not because you are helping another person. It's also because you are helping yourself and the generation that is with you here. So we need to also stop looking at solidarity as an action, as a compassionate action that you're doing to help someone else. No, when we are talking about climate justice, when we are talking about climate change, actually, there's no one who is escaping this, no? Because change is happening everywhere. So solidarity should start, it's what we are doing at a personal level, which I always emphasize that for this to work, there has to be a personal connection into it, not a feeling of obligation, not a feeling of duty. So there has to be personal, so that as a collective, then we also find a voice into this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rose. I think that's a great place to end on, although, again, I know we could speak for hours with all of the many, many stories and actual work that's happening. So I encourage everyone that's listening to reach out to the speakers and follow their work. and do your own research, get out there, join some organization doing something in your communities, because there's so much things being done and we all need to be out here as part of these movements for liberation and climate justice. So thank you, Pelin, Rose, Leyla, for joining us. Thank you so much to the interpreters also for staying on a little longer with us. Thank you. And to everyone listening, we'll have another session of this soon, so stay tuned. Follow Systemic Justice on Instagram, where you'll find links to watch the playback of this and the first 3 episodes as well. So, all right, until next time, have a
Thank you very
beautiful
much.
day. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Teşekkürler.